The night was quiet, and the forest around Alex's cabin was peaceful. The wind whispered through the trees, and the distant hoot of an owl was the only sound. Alex was sitting by the fireplace, a cup of coffee in his hand, enjoying the warmth of the crackling flames. His cabin was far from the city, surrounded by nature, just the way he liked it. Life here was simple, and he preferred it that way. But his quiet evening was about to change. A sudden knock on the door made Alex freeze. He wasn't expecting anyone. No one ever came this far into the woods, especially at night. He glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. His first thought was that it might be a lost hiker or someone in trouble. But who would be out here in the middle of nowhere? The knock came again, louder this time. Alex put his coffee down and grabbed the flashlight from the table. Slowly, he walked to the door. His heart was beating faster now. Peering through the peephole, he saw nothing but darkness. Whoever was outside was standing off to the side, out of view. That made him uneasy. "Who's there?" Alex called out, his voice firm but cautious. No answer. The knock came again, softer now, almost hesitant. Something about it felt strange, like whoever was knocking wasn't just seeking shelter. Against his better judgment, Alex unlocked the door but kept the chain in place. He opened it just a crack and shone the flashlight outside. That's when he saw her. She wasn't human. A tall figure stood in the shadows, her silver skin reflecting the moonlight. Her eyes glowed faintly, an otherworldly yellow, and her face was sharp and alien. She wore a dark suit that looked battered and torn, and her left arm hung limp at her side. Blood, dark blue and unlike anything Alex had seen, dripped onto the porch. The alien woman stepped closer, her movements slow and cautious. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with urgency. "Help me." Alex's mind raced. An alien, here, on Earth. His first instinct was to slam the door and lock it, but he couldn't. She looked, desperate. Her glowing eyes met his, and he saw something that froze him in place. Fear. "Who are you?" Alex asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you want?" The alien swayed, struggling to stay on her feet. "I owe you my life," she said, her words accented but clear. "But I need your help." Before Alex could respond, her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the porch. Instinct took over. He unchained the door and knelt beside her. Up close, she looked even worse. Her suit was scorched in places, and her skin was marred with cuts and bruises. She was breathing, but it was shallow. Alex hesitated. This was insane. He didn't know anything about her, or if she was dangerous. But she looked like she was barely holding on. He couldn't just leave her there. "Come on," Alex muttered, more to himself than to her. He slid his arms under her and lifted her as carefully as he could. She was surprisingly light for someone her size. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he noticed the faint hum of her suit's damaged tech. It buzzed weakly, sparking every few seconds. Inside the cabin, Alex laid her down on the couch. He grabbed a blanket and covered her, unsure if she needed warmth. What did aliens even need? He didn't have time to think about it. First, he needed to see if she was okay. He ran to get his first aid kit, though he doubted it would do much for her. When he returned, her eyes were half open, watching him. "Why? Are you helping me?" she asked weakly. Alex frowned. "You knocked on my door. What was I supposed to do? Leave you out there to die?" She didn't respond, but her gaze softened. Alex noticed a strange device strapped to her wrist. It looked broken, but it gave off a faint light, like it was scanning him. He decided not to ask about it, for now. As he worked to clean one of the wounds on her arm, she flinched. "I'm sorry," he said, trying to be gentle. "I don't know what I'm doing here. You're the first alien I've ever met." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Valra," she said. "My name is Valra." Alex nodded. "I'm Alex." "Alex," she repeated, her voice trailing off as her eyes closed. For a moment, Alex panicked, but her breathing steadied. She was just unconscious. Exhaustion had taken over. He leaned back in his chair, staring at her. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what did she mean when she said she owed him her life? As the fire crackled and the forest outside remained silent, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than he could imagine. The alien story. The next morning, Alex woke up to the sound of low, pained groans. For a moment, he thought he had dreamed it all. The knock on the door, the alien woman collapsing on his porch. But when he looked toward the couch, there she was. Valera. She was awake, though barely, her glowing yellow eyes scanning the room like a cornered animal. Her body was tense, as if ready to spring into action despite her obvious injuries. The blanket had slipped off her shoulders, revealing the strange, intricate patterns etched into her silver skin, markings that seemed to pulse faintly with her breathing. "Good, you're awake," Alex said, trying to keep his tone calm. He didn't want to startle her. "How are you feeling?" Valera didn't answer immediately. Her gaze flicked to the window, then to the door, as if assessing the exits. Finally, she looked at him. "Why? Didn't you call your authorities?" Alex raised an eyebrow. "You mean the government? Or the military?" "Yeah, no thanks. They'd show up here with guns and ask questions later." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "Then why did you help me?" Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because you looked like you needed it. You were bleeding on my porch. What was I supposed to do?" For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Valera leaned back against the couch, wincing. "Humans are strange," she muttered. Alex chuckled. "You're not the first to say that. Now, do you want to tell me what happened? Why are you here? And who's after you?" Valera's expression darkened, and her body tensed again. "You wouldn't understand," she said quietly. "Try me." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "My name is Valera. I am, or was, a commander in the Zareth Defense Corps. My mission was to protect the colonies in the Althis sector from raiders." "Raiders?" Alex repeated, leaning forward. "Like space pirates." "Something like that," she said. "But more organized, more ruthless. They call themselves the Tivash. They prey on the weak, taking resources, slaves, anything they can get their hands on." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. He'd seen enough sci-fi movies to know this sounded bad. "So, what happened?" Valera's glowing eyes dimmed slightly, as if the memory pained her. "We received a distress call from a small colony. The Tivash were attacking. My squadron responded, but it was a trap. They weren't just raiding. They were looking for me." "For you?" Alex asked, confused. "Why you?" Valera hesitated, then lifted her left arm, revealing the strange device strapped to her wrist. "This," she said. "It's called a Kynar beacon. It contains vital intelligence, coordinates to hidden refugee colonies, supply routes, strategic plans. With it, the Tivash could destroy our resistance." Alex stared at the device, understanding dawning on him. "So they set a trap to capture you and get the beacon." Valera nodded. "They ambushed us. My squadron was wiped out. I barely escaped in my ship, but they followed me. I managed to reach this planet and crash-landed in the forest." Her voice grew quieter. "I thought I'd lost them, but they're still hunting me. If they find me, they'll take the beacon, and countless lives will be lost." Alex leaned back in his chair, trying to process everything. This wasn't just some alien on the run. She was carrying the key to an intergalactic war. And now she was sitting in his cabin, injured and vulnerable, while her enemies were somewhere out there, searching for her. "You said last night that you owe me your life," Alex said, breaking the silence. "What did you mean?" Valera's expression softened, and she looked away, almost embarrassed. "You didn't have to help me. Most would have turned me away or worse, handed me over to my enemies for a reward. But you showed me mercy. I am bound by the Carlton Code. A life saved is a life owed. I am in your debt." Alex rubbed the back of his neck, feeling awkward. "Okay, well, I appreciate that, I guess. But let's focus on keeping you alive first. Do you think they'll find you here?" Valora's eyes narrowed. "They will find me," she said grimly. "It's only a matter of time. The T-Vash are relentless." "Great," Alex muttered. "So what do we do?" Valora hesitated, then sat up straighter, wincing as she moved. "I need to repair the beacon," she said. "It's damaged. If I can fix it, I can send a signal to my people. They'll send reinforcements." "And if we can't fix it?" Alex asked. Valora's gaze was steady. "Then we fight." Alex stared at her, wondering how he'd gone from a quiet life in the woods to being part of an intergalactic war. But looking at Valora, he realized something. She wasn't just a soldier or a fugitive. She was a survivor. And now, whether he liked it or not, they were in this together. Trust is earned. The days stretched into an uneasy calm. Alex and Valora spoke little as she recovered her strength, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Despite her injuries, she maintained an aura of caution, her glowing eyes darting to every corner of the room as if expecting an ambush. Alex could see that she wasn't just an alien. She was a warrior, constantly on edge, trained to expect the worst. He couldn't blame her. Her story had shaken him to his core. The idea of a galactic war raging beyond the stars, with lives hanging in the balance, felt surreal. But the proof was sitting right there on his couch, her silver skin and glowing markings a constant reminder that this was no ordinary visitor. As Alex prepared lunch, the faint hum of Valora's wrist device caught his attention. She was studying it intently, her sharp features creased with frustration. Sparks flickered from the broken device, and she muttered something in a language Alex couldn't understand. "Is it fixable?" Alex asked, breaking the silence. Valora glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Not without the right tools. This planet, your technology is primitive." Alex bristled at the remark, but held his tongue. "Well, if you tell me what you need, I can see what I have. My workshop isn't exactly a spaceship repair station, but it's something." Valora's gaze lingered on him for a moment, as if assessing whether he was serious. Finally, she nodded. "I need tools for fine work. Precision. Anything that can manipulate microcircuits." "Got it," Alex said, setting his plate aside. He disappeared into the back room and returned with a box of tools. "This is what I've got. Take your pick." Valora inspected the tools with a critical eye, her hands moving delicately over the assortment of screwdrivers, pliers, and soldering equipment. She selected a few items, her movements deliberate and efficient. Alex couldn't help but notice the way her fingers trembled slightly, a sign that her strength hadn't fully returned. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words almost hesitant. Alex smiled faintly. "No problem." For the next hour, Valora worked on the device, while Alex kept an eye on her from across the room. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than she was letting on. She was clearly used to being in control, but now she was vulnerable. It made her wary, guarded. He decided to break the silence. "Can I ask you something?" Alex said, leaning against the counter. Valora didn't look up. "You already are." "Fair point," Alex said with a chuckle. "What's the deal with the markings on your skin? Do they mean something?" This time, she paused, her fingers hovering over the device. "They are Carlton sigils," she said, "marks of my rank and my lineage. Each one represents a victory or a vow." Alex raised an eyebrow. "So, like tattoos?" Valora frowned, clearly unimpressed with the comparison. "They are sacred, earned through blood and honor. They are not decorative." "Got it. No tattoos," Alex said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Valora's lips twitched, and for the first time, Alex thought he saw the hint of a smile. It was fleeting, but it was there. He decided to press his luck. You know, for someone who doesn't trust humans, you're putting a lot of faith in me. Valora's gaze sharpened. Trust is not given lightly. But you saved my life. That earns you consideration. Alex smirked. Consideration, ha. I'll take it. Before Valora could respond, a sharp beeping sound filled the room. Her device had powered on, its screen flickering to life. Valora's expression immediately turned serious as she studied the display. Alex leaned closer, trying to get a look. Is it working? He asked. Valora nodded, but her tone was grim. Partially. The beacon signal is weak. I cannot reach my people from here. What do you need? Valora hesitated, her glowing eyes meeting his. A higher vantage point, somewhere elevated, with a clear line of sight to the sky. The signal needs to be boosted. Alex thought for a moment. There's an old radio tower a few miles from here. It hasn't been used in years, but it might work. Valora's eyes narrowed. Is it secure? It's abandoned. Should be safe, Alex said. But it's a hike through the forest. Are you up for it? Valora straightened, her posture tense but determined. I'll manage. Alex nodded, grabbing his jacket and a backpack. All right, let's get moving before it gets dark. As they prepared to leave, Valora hesitated by the door. She turned to Alex, her expression softer than before. You are different, human. Most would not risk themselves for someone like me. Alex shrugged, trying to play it off. Guess I'm just not most people. Valora held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Perhaps not. With that, they stepped out into the forest, the weight of their mission heavy on both their shoulders. Neither of them spoke as they moved through the trees, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of understanding, a fragile trust beginning to form between two very different beings who now shared the same fight. The enemy's approach. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, the faint trickle of a nearby stream. But as Alex and Valora moved deeper into the woods, a different kind of tension settled over them. The air felt heavier, the shadows longer. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Valora walked a few steps ahead, her movements precise and silent despite her injuries. Her glowing eyes scanned the surroundings, every muscle in her body taut. Alex followed closely, his backpack loaded with supplies and tools for the radio tower. He couldn't help but admire her focus. She moved like a predator, every step deliberate, every glance calculated. You've done this before, haven't you? Alex asked, trying to break the silence. Valora didn't look back. Survived. Fought. Hunted. Yes. Her tone was clipped, but Alex understood. She was in survival mode, and distractions were dangerous. Still, he couldn't help himself. What about being hunted? You seem experienced. Valora finally glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. The Tivash are relentless. They have hunted my people for generations. If you show weakness, they will exploit it. If you hesitate, they will kill you. Comforting. Alex muttered, gripping the straps of his backpack a little tighter. Valora stopped suddenly, raising a hand to signal him to halt. Alex froze, his heart pounding. She tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing as she listened intently. What is it? Alex whispered. Valora didn't answer immediately. She crouched low, her gaze fixed on the dense underbrush ahead. We're not alone, she said finally, her voice barely audible. Alex's stomach dropped. How can you tell? Valora pointed to the ground. Alex squinted, trying to see what she was looking at. At first he saw nothing unusual, just leaves and dirt. But then he noticed it. A faint, almost imperceptible trail of crushed foliage leading toward them. They've been here, Valora said, her tone grim. They're tracking us. Alex's mouth went dry. The Tivash. Valora nodded. They're close. Too close. Panic bubbled in Alex's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. What do we do? Valora stood slowly, her movements controlled. We keep moving. Quickly. If they catch us out here in the open, we won't stand a chance. Alex nodded, following her lead as they picked up the pace. His mind raced with questions. How many were there? How far behind? And what would happen if they caught up? He tried not to think about it, focusing instead on putting one foot in front of the other. The radio tower wasn't far now. They had to reach it before the T-Vash did. As they moved, the forest seemed to close in around them. The once familiar sounds of nature now felt oppressive. Every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Alex's senses were on high alert, his heart pounding with every step. He couldn't tell if it was his imagination, or if the shadows really were moving. Valora suddenly veered off the path, motioning for Alex to follow. "This way," she said quietly. Alex hesitated. "Why?" "The tower's that way. They'll expect us to stay on the path," Valora said. "We need to throw them off." Reluctantly, Alex followed her into the underbrush. The terrain was rough, the ground uneven and covered in roots and rocks. It slowed them down, but Valora seemed to know what she was doing. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning for signs of pursuit. Then they heard it, a faint, mechanical hum in the distance. Alex's blood ran cold. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The T-Vash were coming. Valora stopped, her posture rigid. "They have drones," she said, her voice low. "We need to stay out of sight." "How do we do that?" Alex asked, his voice trembling despite his best efforts. Valora scanned the area, her eyes landing on a thick cluster of trees. "There," she said, pointing. "We'll hide until they pass." They scrambled into the trees, crouching low behind the thick trunks. The hum grew louder, and Alex's breath caught in his throat as a sleek, black drone hovered into view. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, sleek and menacing, with sharp edges and glowing red sensors. It moved slowly, scanning the area with a precision that sent chills down his spine. Valora remained perfectly still, her glowing eyes fixed on the drone. Alex tried to do the same, but his heart was pounding so loudly he was sure it would give them away. The drone lingered for what felt like an eternity before finally moving on. Valora exhaled quietly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "They're close," she said. "We need to move. Now." Alex nodded, swallowing hard as they emerged from their hiding spot. The forest felt even more oppressive now, the tension nearly unbearable. They were running out of time. As they neared the radio tower, Alex spotted it through the trees, a rusted structure rising above the canopy, its antenna pointing skyward like a beacon of hope. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. Valora suddenly grabbed his arm, her grip like iron. "Stop," she hissed. Alex froze. "What is it?" Valora pointed to the base of the tower. Alex followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. There, in the clearing, were three figures. Their armor was dark and jagged, their weapons sleek and alien. The T-Vash had beaten them to the tower. The attack. Alex and Valora crouched in the shadows of the dense forest, just beyond the clearing where the T-Vash soldiers patrolled. The sight of them sent a chill down Alex's spine. Their armor glinted in the faint sunlight that filtered through the canopy, and their movements were unnervingly precise, like predators stalking their prey. "There are three of them," Valora whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't need to say what Alex already knew. They were outmatched. The T-Vash were heavily armed and alert, their alien weapons glowing faintly with an ominous energy. "Can we sneak past them?" Alex asked, keeping his voice low. Valora shook her head. "They're guarding the tower. They'll spot us before we get close. We have to deal with them." "Deal with them?" Alex repeated, his voice rising slightly in panic. "You mean fight them?" Valora's glowing eyes met his, her expression calm but intense. "I mean survive. If we don't stop them, They'll call reinforcements. This planet will become their hunting ground. Alex swallowed hard. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for this. But Valora's determination was unshakable, and he realized he had no choice. If they didn't act, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for them, but for everyone. Valora reached for her wrist device, which had been sparking weakly since she'd repaired it. She pressed a series of buttons, and the device emitted a faint hum. A small compartment opened, revealing a sleek, silver blade. It was unlike any weapon Alex had ever seen, thin and impossibly sharp, with faint blue energy coursing along its edges. "What's that?" Alex asked, unable to hide his curiosity. "A Kralten combat blade," Valora said, her grip firm. "It's designed for close quarters, silent and deadly." "Great," Alex muttered. "What about me? I don't exactly have alien tech lying around." Valora considered this, then glanced at his backpack. "What tools do you have?" Alex quickly rummaged through the bag, pulling out a heavy wrench and a utility knife. He held them up, feeling absurd. "This is all I've got." Valora tilted her head, her lips twitching in what might have been amusement. "Crude, but it will do. Stay behind me. I'll handle the first two. You take the third." Alex's stomach twisted. "What if I can't?" "You can," Valora interrupted, her tone firm. "You've already proven your courage. Trust yourself." Before Alex could argue, Valora slipped into the clearing, moving with the silent grace of a predator. Alex followed reluctantly, his heart pounding in his chest. The Tivash soldiers hadn't noticed them yet, their attention focused on scanning the perimeter. It was now or never. Valora struck first, her blade slicing through the air with lethal precision. The first Tivash soldier didn't even have time to react before collapsing silently to the ground. The second turned, raising its weapon, but Valora was faster. She lunged, her blade finding its mark between the joints of its armor. Alex watched in stunned silence as Valora dispatched the two soldiers with terrifying efficiency. But the third soldier had spotted her, and was already raising a strange, glowing weapon. Before Alex could think, he acted. With a shout he charged, swinging the heavy wrench with all his strength. The soldier turned, startled, but Alex's blow landed before it could fire. The wrench connected with the soldier's helmet, the impact ringing out like a gong. The Tivash stumbled, and Alex pressed his advantage, swinging again and again until the alien fell to the ground, unmoving. Panting, Alex stared at the fallen soldier, his hands trembling. I did it," he muttered, almost in disbelief. "You did," Valora said, appearing at his side. There was a faint note of approval in her voice. "But we're not safe yet." As if to prove her point, a loud, piercing noise filled the air, a high-pitched screech that made Alex's ears ache. He looked up to see a small disc-shaped drone hovering above the clearing. Its red sensors blinked rapidly, and a strange beam of light scanned the area. "What is that?" Alex asked, panic rising. "A scout drone," Valora said, her tone grim. "It's calling for reinforcements. We need to move. Now." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed Alex's arm and pulled him toward the tower. They ran across the clearing, the drone's screeching growing louder. Alex's lungs burned and his legs ached, but he pushed himself forward, driven by pure adrenaline. They reached the base of the tower, and Valora immediately began scaling the rusted ladder. "Climb," she shouted over her shoulder. Alex followed, his hands slipping on the cold metal as he climbed as fast as he could. Below, the screeching grew louder, joined by the unmistakable hum of more drones approaching. His heart pounded as he glanced down and saw their red lights weaving through the trees like hunting wolves. Valora reached the top of the tower and immediately began working on her wrist device. "I need to boost the signal," she said, her fingers flying over the controls. "Hold them off while I work." "Hold them off," Alex repeated, his voice breaking. "How am I supposed to?" Before he could finish, a burst of red energy shot past him, narrowly missing his head. The drones had reached the base of the tower, their weapons firing sporadically. "Figure it out," Valera shouted, her focus on the device. Alex gritted his teeth, gripping the wrench tightly. He didn't know how they were going to survive this, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back now. A bond forged in fire. The rusted metal platform of the radio tower creaked under Alex's weight as he crouched behind the railings, gripping the wrench in his trembling hands. Below him, the forest was alive with chaos. The Tivash drones buzzed like angry hornets, their glowing red lights cutting through the shadows. Energy blasts sizzled through the air, striking the tower's base with an intensity that sent vibrations rippling upward. Valera knelt beside the tower's transmitter, her fingers working frantically over her wrist device. Sparks flew as she connected a makeshift cable to the transmitter, her glowing eyes narrowed with focus. "Almost there," she shouted over the noise, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Almost isn't good enough." Alex yelled back, flinching as another energy blast zipped past his shoulder. He ducked lower, gripping the railing for support. "We're sitting ducks up here." Valera didn't look up. "Keep them occupied. I need time." "Great plan," Alex muttered sarcastically. He peeked over the edge of the platform, spotting 3 more drones weaving through the trees toward the tower. Their sleek, disc-like shapes moved with eerie precision, and their glowing weapons charged with ominous hums. Swallowing his fear, Alex grabbed a loose piece of metal piping from the platform. He leaned over the edge and hurled it with all his strength. The makeshift projectile struck one of the drones, sending it spiraling into a tree with a burst of sparks. "One down," he shouted, a flicker of confidence igniting in his chest. But the other drones weren't deterred. They fired in unison, their energy blasts striking dangerously close. The platform shuddered, and Alex stumbled, barely catching himself. "Valera," he yelled, "they're tearing this place apart." "I know." Valera snapped, her voice tight with concentration. "I just need 30 more seconds." "Pretty sure we don't have that long." Alex ducked as another blast struck the railing, sending a shower of sparks over him. His heart was pounding, but he couldn't let the fear paralyze him. He had to keep fighting. Spotting a loose cable dangling from the transmitter, Alex had an idea. He grabbed the cable and wrapped it around one of the railings, creating a makeshift trip line. "Come on, you tin cans," he muttered, positioning himself as bait. As the drones closed in, Alex stood up, waving his arms. "Hey, over here, you oversized frisbees." The drones locked onto him immediately, their sensors glowing brighter. They surged upward toward the platform, and just as they reached the edge, Alex dove out of the way. The first drone struck the cable, its momentum flipping it into the side of the tower. The impact sent it crashing to the ground in a fiery heap. "Yes," Alex shouted, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. But his victory was short-lived. The final drone hovered just out of reach, its weapon charging for a devastating blast. Before it could fire, Valera sprang into action. She moved with blinding speed, her combat blade flashing in the dim light. With a single fluid motion, she leaped from the platform onto the drone, driving the blade into its core. The drone sputtered and spun wildly before exploding in midair, sending a shockwave that nearly knocked Alex off his feet. Valera landed back on the platform with feline grace, her blade still crackling with energy. She turned to Alex, her expression fierce. "The signal is sent," she said. "Reinforcements are on their way." "Thank God," Alex panted, leaning against the railing. "Because I don't think I could take much more of this." Valera's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, she extended her hand toward him. "You fought well," she said. "Better than I expected." Alex took her hand, her grip firm but surprisingly warm. "Guess I'm full of surprises," he said, managing a weak smile. Their moment of calm was interrupted by a distant roar, a low guttural sound that sent a chill down Alex's spine. Valora's head snapped toward the forest, her glowing eyes narrowing. "That's not a drone," she said, her voice low and tense. "What is it?" Alex asked, dread creeping into his chest. Valora didn't answer immediately. She stepped to the edge of the platform, scanning the treetops. The roar came again, louder this time, and the trees in the distance began to sway as something massive moved through the forest. "They sent a reaper," Valora said, her tone grim. "A Tivash ground enforcer. It's heavily armored, nearly unstoppable." "Nearly?" Alex echoed, his voice rising. "You've got a plan for this, right?" Valora turned to him, her expression resolute. "We fight, together." Alex wanted to protest, to say he wasn't a soldier, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he nodded, gripping the wrench in his hand. "Okay," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "What's the plan?" Valora's lips curved into a faint smile. "We survive." As the towering silhouette of the Reaper emerged from the forest, its glowing red eyes locking onto the tower, Alex realized that he and Valora were bound by more than just circumstance. In the face of overwhelming odds, they had forged an unbreakable bond, a bond that would be tested in the fire of the battle to come. A debt repaid. The Reaper towered above the treetops, its hulking frame illuminated by the crimson glow of its sensors. It was a mechanical monstrosity, with jagged armor plates and limbs that moved with terrifying precision. Each step it took sent shockwaves through the ground, shaking the fragile radio tower where Alex and Valora stood. Alex gripped the railing, his knuckles white, as he stared down at the approaching behemoth. "That thing's a tank," he muttered. "How are we supposed to stop it?" Valora stood beside him, her glowing eyes fixed on the Reaper. Despite the odds, she radiated an unshakable calm. "It's not invincible," she said. "Its sensors and power core are its weak points, but we'll have to get close to disable them." "Close?" Alex repeated, his voice cracking. "That thing will turn us into ash before we get within 10 feet. Valora turned to him, her expression softer than he'd seen it before. "I know you're afraid," she said. "I am too, but you've already proven you're capable of more than you realize. Together, we can do this." Alex swallowed hard, his heart pounding. He wanted to believe her, but the sight of the Reaper closing in made it nearly impossible. Still, he nodded, forcing himself to focus. "What's the plan?" Valora quickly outlined the strategy. She would distract the Reaper, using her speed and combat training to draw its attention. Meanwhile, Alex would use the tools in his backpack to disable its sensors, which would leave the power core vulnerable to a final strike. "Divide and conquer," Alex muttered. "Classic." "It's risky," Valora admitted, "but it's our only chance." Before Alex could respond, the Reaper unleashed a deafening roar, its mechanical voice reverberating through the forest. A beam of red energy shot from its arm, striking the base of the tower. The impact sent a shower of debris flying into the air, and the platform shook violently. "Go!" Valora shouted, leaping from the platform with her combat blade in hand. Alex hesitated for only a moment before following her down the ladder. His mind raced as he replayed the plan, every nerve in his body screaming at him to run in the opposite direction. But he couldn't abandon Valora. Not now. On the ground, Valora darted toward the Reaper with incredible speed, her movements fluid and precise. The mechanical giant turned its attention to her, its sensors locking onto her glowing form. It unleashed another energy blast, but Valora dodged effortlessly, closing the distance between them. "Come on, you overgrown tin can," Alex muttered, clutching the wrench in his hand as he crept through the underbrush toward the Reaper's flank. His heart pounded as he approached the towering machine, its sensors scanning the area in a pattern. He had to time this perfectly. Valora kept the Reaper occupied, her blade flashing as she struck at its armored legs. Though her attacks didn't penetrate its thick plating, they were enough to draw its focus. The Reaper swiped at her with one massive arm, but she rolled under the attack, her agility unmatched. Meanwhile, Alex reached the Reaper's side. He spotted the exposed sensor array near its neck, a cluster of glowing red orbs set into a panel. Pulling out a screwdriver and a pair of pliers, he climbed onto a fallen tree to reach the array. His hands shook as he worked to disable the sensors, the heat from the machine making his palms sweat. Come on, he muttered under his breath, yanking out wires and prying open panels. The Reaper roared again, and Alex glanced down to see Valra narrowly dodging another attack. She was buying him time, but he had to hurry. Finally, with a spark and a hiss, the last sensor went dark. The Reaper froze for a moment, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Valra!" Alex shouted. "The sensors are down." Valra didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the Reaper's back, where a faint blue glow indicated its power core. With a powerful leap, she drove her blade into the core, the weapon crackling with energy as it pierced the machinery. The Reaper let out a mechanical scream, its limbs flailing wildly. "Get clear," Valra shouted, yanking her blade free and diving away. Alex didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled back into the cover of the trees just as the Reaper's power core exploded in a brilliant burst of light and heat. The shockwave knocked him off his feet, and he landed hard on the forest floor. For a moment, everything was silent. When Alex opened his eyes, he saw the smoldering remains of the Reaper scattered across the clearing. Valra was standing amidst the wreckage, her silver skin streaked with soot, but her posture unyielding. She turned to him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You did it," Alex said, pulling himself to his feet. "We did it," Valra corrected. She walked over to him, extending a hand. "I owe you my life, Alex, and I don't take that lightly." Alex shook her hand, a small laugh escaping him despite everything. "Well, I guess that makes us even." Valra's expression grew serious. "Not quite. You've proven yourself more than just a human. You're a warrior. If you ever need my help, I will come." Before Alex could respond, a faint hum filled the air. He looked up to see a sleek, alien ship descending through the clouds. Valra's reinforcements had arrived. As she boarded the ship, Valra turned to Alex one last time. "The galaxy owes you a debt, Alex. And so do I, until we meet again." Alex watched as the ship ascended, disappearing into the sky. For a moment, he stood in the clearing, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. Then he smiled, turning back toward his cabin. Life would never be the same, but somehow, he was okay with that.